We begin now with the New Yorker's investigative reporter Seymour Hersh and his big piece about the push inside the vice president's office for an attack on Iran. I know you've got a lot in this big piece, Cy. First question. Who's pushing for an attack after the disaster or the catastrophe of this war with Iraq? Who's pushing for another war in the Middle East?
Well, Cheney is the leader, obviously. I wouldn't say he's pushing for another war. What I would say is that his office has been sort of a point. The point for continuing to look very hard at Iran and thinking one solution to resolving your problems inside Iraq is to do something about Iran, to get him to stop meddling.
Let's not jump over that. Who is David Wormser and what does he want? He works for the vice president. Describe his role here.
He's assistant to the vice president. He's sort of their main guy on our issues about Iran. He's out of the American Enterprise Institute. He's a very bright, very nice guy. Worked with Richard Pearl back in those days. I guess you call him a classic neoconservative.
He was pushing a war in Iraq, a regime change against Saddam Hussein back. I mean, the Project for the New American Century, the clean break recommendation to Bibi Netanyahu. He's been on this trail for a long time.
Yes.
Of aggressive action by us in the Middle East. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. For 10 years.
Is he now pushing within the vice president's office for the vice president to endorse an attack?
Well, there's a lot of people who believe that the Israelis are basically right, and when they say this is an existential threat, that we must deal with Iran. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. And the question is, will George Bush leave office without doing something about Iran? Whether he can get him, he's not going to get him to talk, not at the way he's going. The price is too high. There's no reason. In this article, I make the point that why should Iran talk to us? Well,
you're not the only one, if it is David Wormser, you're certainly not the only American pushing for an attack on Iraq's nuclear facilities, but I think he might be one, according to your article, who recognizes the dimensions of that attack. You can't just surgically attack. You got to go after their AAA. You got to go after all the defensive capability, and you have to recognize that they could well respond with an all-out declaration of war against us and take all kinds of steps against the oil lanes and everything else. Do they know that in the vice president's office, that war means war?
They think that, what the Air Force would call 1,000 points of light. There's a lot of targets in there that you have to light up, but they think they can handle it. There's been a lot of very good studies done, I should say. The military they think they can suppress the Iranian missiles. There's a lot of classified stuff that they've looked at. We have a lot of technical intelligence we've collected on Iran. We know where everything moves there. We have people inside. The Israelis have people inside. We're not dark about it. We have a lot of insight.
Okay. Now that the vice president has been overruled in his attempt to try to keep Rumsfeld and his attempt to try to prevent Gates from coming in. That's a fair assessment, isn't it? He's been overruled?
He was pretty much, I think, the reading I get, and I write about this too, is he was pretty much, he went along.
He went along. Was he overruled?
I don't know. Does anybody really know what goes on between Bush?
The reason I ask that is about the future, not what happened here, but is the vice president still strong enough with the president that he could push for an attack on Iran before the two of them leave office?
Scowcroft, Baker, and 41, the old president, there's no question that the Gates move was orchestrated in part to neutralize Cheney. This is something I did write about.
It's in the article.
The goal is to figure out some way to stop. Cheney's very powerful. He's very, very bright. He's very competent. He runs everything. He knows everything. The president, as much as I can tell from talking to the few people that I talk to around him, the president defers often on such...
Well, you don't defer the question of whether to attack Iran or not. He's going to have... The question is, you've got some neoconservatives, people like Robert Kagan, who have openly written columns within the last couple of months saying this president, to fulfill his doctrine, has to attack Iran before he leaves office and get rid of those nuclear capabilities, or else he will fail as president. They're very stark about it. And in your piece, you talk about Wormser having something of that view. I just wonder, will the same pressures that took us into regime change with Iraq, with all the questions that were still up there, will do it again? Too hard to say, or what?
Well, nobody can tell. I mean, it's ridiculous to predict the future, but it is. You just can't do it. But you can do one thing. You can say one thing. There is a pattern emerging, which is really scary. Again, in this article, I write the CIA has done an assessment that doesn't say anything about Iran's intentions. They may have dreams about a bomb. What the CIA says is we've looked hard. We can't find any evidence of a significant weapons program.
Right.
But they also say, the CIA also says, what's the rush? They also suggest that if you do go to war with Iran now, you're going to be kicking off the can into something very, very big that you don't really understand. You could drive Sunnis and Shia together in another caliphate. This is in their report.
Sure.
Meanwhile, the CIA...
certainly unite the Iranians against this. The new breed secular pro-Western crowd will hate us for this.
Why not?
Yeah.
I mean, and also drive the price of oil up for here too. But
by the way, I've always wondered the limits of military power. You could blow up whatever facility you thought they had. and then rebuild. We bombed strategically against Germany, and they kept rebuilding underground. They just proliferated even further out. They were building and building right to the end of the war. What stops Iran, it's a modern country, from just rebuilding whatever we blow up?
Well, not only that, despite the fact that I say we know everything we think we know, it's a country that's been digging holes for 1,000 centuries,
And they have duplicative facilities, right?
Well, you just don't know. The CIA says no, but here's what makes it interesting. The White House hated that intelligence. Did not like it, sort of kicked it out.
Who's the White House?
Cheney's office, basically.
What is it? Pat Moynihan would never take a letter from the White House. He said, that's a building. Who's sending me the letter?
Like an editor.
Well, who is Dick Cheney? David Addington?
No. On this one,
Wormser?
it'd be Elliot Abrams would certainly be involved, although he's not directly in the office. He'd certainly be involved because he's very powerful.
So the gang's still here.
Oh, my God. You know what's amazing about this gang?
The gang that got us in the war with Iraq, the intellectual people around the president and vice president who thought it was just a gangbusters idea to go to Iraq, they're still there calling the shots on Iran?
But what's amazing about it is that when you think about it, the intellectual leaders, Wolfowitz, Libby, Douglas Feith, and
Libby's busy, and Doug's trying to get a table.
They're out.
Doug's trying to get a table with the Georgetown Faculty Club for lunch. But what's his name? Libby's busy, as I said, and Wolf is up doing the McNamara business of saving the world again.
Pearl's no longer the Defense Policy Board, and yet
he's complaining. Pearl's out there complaining. But so's Ken.
Yeah, they're all. Come on, I've never felt more sympathy for Rumsfeld than to listen to Edelman complain about how tough Rumsfeld was at their meetings. I mean, I've never had my heart went out to Rumsfeld.
It's got to be a play someday. This is Broadway, these guys.
No, this is slapstick. It's strictly slapstick.
It's a piece of work, these guys.
But here's the point I want to make. With these powerful leaders out, Wolfowitz, Pearl, etc., the neocons are still dominant. It's amazing. They've sort of seated themselves.
Okay, your writing is once again elicited a response from the White House, and I have to read this because it's appropriate. Here's the White House's response to what Cy Hirsch wrote today in the New Yorker. Cy Hirsch, Seymour Hirsch they call him, is unfortunately continuing his series of inaccuracy-riddled articles about the Bush administration with another error-filled piece about the administration's policy toward Iran. The White House is not going to dignify the work of an author who has viciously degraded our troops. I want you to respond to that part. And whose articles consistently rely on outright falsehoods to justify his own radical views.
What about the story? That's all the answer.
What about, have you viciously attacked our
soldiers?
No,
what happened is a couple of weeks ago I gave a speech in Montreal at McGill University, and the editor picked a line out at random. What I do, let me tell you.
What did you say?
I said there's been never a war as violent and murderous as this one. And that's true. It's a very violent war. But the point I've always made in 40 years of reporting, responsibility always goes to the top. And the kids who do the shooting are as much victims. And in that speech I did.
You believe, honestly, when you gave that speech that you were talking about the commander-in-chief and his civilian leaders in the Pentagon?
No, that's what the speech said. It was just a line taken at random that was put on as a headline, and that's what the White House went
to make it look like you're anti-soldier.
It happened right after the day. This all blew up after John Kerry's thing. It was right before the election. Everybody is grabbing every straw. You know, the White House can read exit polls, too. They knew. Can I give you some advice? When you're critical of our military, not of our military, but of our military establishment, of our president, do it here. Well, the problem is doing it overseas is people don't like the sound of it. You know, that's so interesting. It's a speech I've made. I was critical of the policy. It's a speech I've made everywhere because of that might happen to come in Canada. I've made that speech for 2 years, the same line. You're right. I got an amazing amount of criticism. What kind of a coward is he to go to Canada to give this speech? George Montgomery did it right after losing the race to Nixon. Went over and trashed American policy in Vietnam, and everybody thought he was a skunk for doing it. Well, you know, that's an interesting point because, for me, I would say, of course, I didn't trash the truth. No, I didn't trash the truth. Save it for home. No, it's not that. You know, you can be critical. We're a big country. We can take a little criticism, but it's particularly easy to turn your words against you overseas. It's a fact. I once said in Canada and Toronto, I said we got to understand our enemy, not just hate them. Understand them. Figure out what we're up against. That was turned into the soft line. I thought it was the hard line. I think being smart's the hard line. Anyway, Hirsch, you're unbelievable. You got him roused up again. That's my job. It's my job to try to figure out what you know and really can figure it out and what might not be true, because I do want to know what Wormser's up to. Anyway, thank you, Cy, and the Vice President.